Know, O Ephraim, that there was, in former times in the country of the Persians, a monarch who was called King Yunan, possessing great treasures and numerous forces, valiant, and having troops of every description. But he was afflicted with leprosy, which the physicians and sages had failed to remove. Neither their potions nor powders nor ointments were of any benefit to him, and none of the physicians was able to cure him. At length there arrived at the city of this king a great sage, a profoundly wise person, stricken in years, old in age, who was called the sage Duban. He was acquainted with ancient Greek, Persian, modern Greek, Arabic, and Syrian books, and with medicine and astrology, both with respect to their scientific principles and the rules of their practical applications for good and evil, as well as the properties of plants, dried and fresh, the injurious and the useful. He was also well versed in the wisdom of the philosophers, alchemy and magic, and embraced a knowledge of all the medical and other sciences. After this sage had arrived in the city and remained in it a few days, he heard of the case of the king, of the leprosy with which Allah had afflicted him, and that the physicians and men of science had failed to cure him. In consequence of this information, he passed the next night in deep study, and when the morning came and diffused its light, and the sun saluted the ornament of the good, the Prophet Muhammad, who said the sun never riseth until it hath saluted me, he attired himself in the richest of his apparel, and presented himself before the king. Having kissed the ground before him, and offered up a prayer for the continuance of his power and happiness, and greeted him in the best manner he was able, he informed him who he was, and said, O king, I have heard of the disease which hath attacked thy person, and that many of the physicians are unacquainted with the means of removing it, and I will cure thee without giving thee to drink any potion, or anointing thee with ointment. When King Yunan heard his words, he wondered and said to him, How wilt thou do this? By Allah, if thou cure me, I will enrich thee and thy children's children, and I will heap favors upon thee, and whatever thou shalt desire shall be thine, and thou shalt be my companion and my friend. He then bestowed upon him a robe of honor and other presents, and said to him, Wilt thou cure me of this disease without potion or ointment? He answered, Yes, I will cure thee without any discomfort to thy person. And the king was extremely astonished and said, O sage, at what time and on what day shall that which thou hast proposed to me be done? Hasten it, O my father. He answered, I hear and obey. He then went out from the presence of the king and hired a house in which he deposited his books and medicines and drugs. Having done this, he selected certain of his medicines and drugs and made a gauff stick with a hollow handle into which he introduced them, after which he made a ball for it, skillfully adapted, and on the following day, after he had finished these, he went again to the king and kissed the ground before him, and directed him to repair to the horse course, and to play with the ball and gauff stick. The king, attended by his emirs and chamberlains and wazirs, went thither, and, as soon as he arrived there, the sage Duban presented himself before him, and handed to him the gauff stick, saying, Take this gauff stick, and grasp it thus, and ride along the horse course, and strike the ball with it with all thy force, until the palm of thy hand and thy whole body become moist with perspiration, when the medicine will penetrate into thy hand, and pervade thy whole body. And when thou hast done this, and the medicine remains in thee, return to thy palace, and enter the bath, and wash thyself, and sleep. Then shalt thou find thyself cured, and peace be on thee. So King Yunan took the gauff stick from the sage, and grasped it in his hand, and mounted his horse, and the ball was thrown before him, and he urged his horse after it until he overtook it, when he struck it with all his force. And when he had continued this exercise as long as was necessary, and bathed and slept, he looked upon his skin, and not a vestige of the leprosy remained. It was clear as white silver. Upon this he rejoiced exceedingly, his heart was dilated, and he was full of happiness. On the following morning he entered the council chamber and sat upon his throne, and the chamberlains and great officers of his court came before him. The sage Duban also presented himself, and when the king saw him, he rose to him in haste and seated him by his side. Services of food were then spread before them, and the sage ate with the king and remained as his guest all the day. And when the night approached, the king gave him 2,000 pieces of gold, besides dresses of honor and other presents, and mounted him on his own horse. And so the sage returned to his house. And the king was astonished at his skill, saying, "This man hath cured me by an external process, without anointing me with ointment. By Allah, this is consummate science, and it is incumbent on me to bestow favors and honors upon him, and to make him my companion and familiar friend as long as I live." He passed the night happy and joyful on account of his recovery, and when he arose he went forth again and sat upon his throne, the officers of his court standing before him, and the emirs and wazirs sitting on his right hand and on his left, and he called for the sage Duban, who came and kissed the ground before him. And the king rose and seated him by his side, and ate with him, and greeted him with compliments. He bestowed upon him again a robe of honor and other presents, and after conversing with him till the approach of night, gave orders that 5 other robes of honor should be given to him, and 1,000 pieces of gold, and the sage departed and returned to his house. Again, when the next morning came, the king went as usual to his council chamber, and the emirs and wazirs and chamberlains surrounded him. Now there was among his wazirs one of ill aspect, and of evil star, sordid, avaricious, and of an envious and malicious disposition. And when he saw that the king had made the sage Duban his friend, and bestowed upon him these favors, he envied him his distinction, and meditated evil against him, agreeably with the adage which saith, "There is no one void of envy," and another which saith, "Tyranny lurketh in the soul, power manifesteth it, and weakness concealeth it." So he approached the king, and kissed the ground before him, and said, "O king of the age, thou art he whose goodness extendeth to all men, and I have an important piece of advice to give thee. If I were to conceal it from thee, I should be a base-born wretch. Therefore, if thou order me to impart it, I will do so." The king, disturbed by these words of the wazir, said, "What is thy advice?" He answered, "O glorious king, it hath been said by the ancients, he who looketh not to results, fortune will not attend him. Now I have seen the king in a way that is not right, since he hath bestowed favors upon his enemy, and upon him who desireth the downfall of his dominion. He hath treated him with kindness, and honored him with the highest honors, and admitted him to the closest intimacy. I therefore fear for the king the consequence of this conduct." At this the king was troubled, and his countenance changed, and he said, "Who is he whom thou regardest as mine enemy, and to whom I show kindness?" He replied, "O king, if thou hast been asleep, awake. I allude to the sage Duban." The king said, "He is my intimate companion, and the dearest of men in my estimation, for he restored me by a thing that I merely held in my hand, and cured me of my disease, which the physicians were unable to remove. And there is not now to be found one like to him in the whole world, from west to east. Wherefore then, dost thou utter these words against him? I will from this day appoint him a regular salary and maintenance, and give him every month 1,000 pieces of gold. And if I give him a share of my kingdom, it were but a small thing to do unto him. I do not think that thou hast said this from any other motive than that of envy." When the wazir heard these words of King Yunan, he said, "O king of great dignity, what hath this crafty sage, this man from whom naught but mischief proceedeth, done unto me, that I should be his enemy, and speak evil of him, and plot with thee to destroy him? I have informed thee respecting him in compassion for thee, and in fear of his despoiling thee of thy happiness, and if my words be not true, destroy me. And thou, O king, continued the wazir of King Yunan, if thou trust in this sage, he will kill thee in the foulest manner. If thou continue to bestow favors upon him, and to make him thine intimate companion. He will plot thy destruction. Dost thou not see that he hath cured thee of the disease by external means, by a thing that thou heldest in thy hand? Therefore, if thou art not secure against his killing thee by a thing that thou shalt hold in the same manner. King Yunan answered, Thou hast spoken truth. The case is as thou hast said, O faithful Wazir. It is probable that this sage came as a spy to accomplish my death. And if he cured me by a thing I held in my hand, he may destroy me by a thing that I may smell. What then, O Wazir, shall be done respecting him? The Wazir answered, Send to him immediately, and desire him to come hither. And when he is come, strike off his head, and so shalt thou avert from thee his evil design, and be secure from him. Betray him before he betray thee. The king said, Thou hast spoken right. Immediately, therefore, he sent for the sage, who came, full of joy, not knowing what the Compassionate had decreed against him, and addressed the king with these words of the poet. If I fail any day to render thee due thanks, tell me for whom I have composed my verse and prose. Thou hast loaded me with favors unsolicited, bestowed without delay on thy part or excuse. How then should I abstain from praising thee as thou deservest, and lauding thee both with my heart and voice? Nay, I will thank thee for the benefits conferred upon me. They are light upon my tongue, though weighty to my back. Knowest thou, said the king, wherefore I have summoned thee? The sage answered, None knoweth what is secret but Allah, whose name be exalted. Then said the king, I have summoned thee that I may take away thy life. The sage, in the utmost astonishment at this announcement, said, O king, wherefore wouldst thou kill me? And what offense hath been committed by me? The king answered, It hath been told me that thou art a spy, and that thou hast come hither to kill me. But I will prevent thee by killing thee first. And so saying, he called out to the executioner, Strike off the head of this traitor and relieve me from his wickedness. Spare me, said the sage, and so may Allah spare thee, and destroy me not, lest Allah destroy thee. And he repeated these words several times, like as I did, O Efret. But thou wouldst not let me go, desiring to destroy me. King Yunan then said to the sage Duban, I shall not be secure unless I kill thee, for thou curedst me by a thing that I held in my hand, and I have no security against thy killing me by a thing that I may smell, or by some other means. O king, said the sage, is this my recompense from thee? Dost thou return evil for good? The king answered, Thou must be slain without delay. When the sage, therefore, was convinced that the king intended to put him to death, and that his fate was inevitable, he lamented the benefit that he had done to the undeserving. The executioner then advanced, and bandaged his eyes, and having drawn his sword, said, Give permission. Upon this the sage wept, and said again, Spare me. And so may Allah spare thee, and destroy me not, lest Allah destroy thee. Wouldst thou return me the recompense of the crocodile? What, said the king, is the story of the crocodile? The sage answered, I cannot relate it while in this condition, but I conjure thee by Allah to spare me, and so may he spare thee. And he wept bitterly. Then one of the chief officers of the king arose and said, O king, give up to me the blood of this sage, for we have not seen him commit any offense against thee, nor have we seen him do aught but cure thee of thy disease, which wearied the other physicians and sages. The king answered, Ye know not the reason wherefore I would kill the sage. It is this, that if I suffered him to live, I should myself inevitably perish. For he who cured me of the disease under which I suffered by a thing that I held in my hand, may kill me by a thing that I may smell. And I fear that he would do so, and would receive an appointment on account of it, seeing that it is probable he is a spy who hath come hither to kill me. I must therefore kill him, and then shall I feel myself safe. The sage then said again, Spare me, and so may Allah spare thee, and destroy me not, lest Allah destroy thee. But he now felt certain, O Efret, that the king would put him to death, and that there was no escape for him. So he said, "O king, if my death is indispensable, grant me some respite, that I may return to my house and acquit myself of my duties, and give directions to my family and neighbors to bury me, and dispose of my medical books. And among my books is one of the most special value, which I offer as a present to thee, that thou mayest treasure it in thy library." "And what," said the king, "is this book?" He answered, "It contains things not to be enumerated, and the smallest of the secret virtues that it possesses is this, that when thou hast cut off my head, if thou open this book and count 3 leaves, and then read 3 lines on the page to the left, the head will speak to thee, and answer whatever thou shalt ask." At this the king was excessively astonished, and shook with delight, and said to him, "O sage, when I have cut off thy head, will it speak?" He answered, "Yes, O king, and this is a wonderful thing." The king then sent him in the custody of guards, and the sage descended to his house, and settled all his affairs on that day, and on the following day he went up to the court, and the emirs and wazirs, and chamberlains and deputies, and all the great officers of the state went thither also, and the court resembled a flower garden. And when the sage had entered, he presented himself before the king, bearing an old book and a small pot containing a powder. And he sat down and said, "Bring me a tray." So they brought him one, and he poured out the powder into it and spread it. He then said, "O king, take this book and do nothing with it until thou hast cut off my head. And when thou hast done so, place it upon this tray, and order someone to press it down upon the powder. And when this is done, the blood will be stanched. Then open the book." As soon as the sage had said this, the king gave orders to strike off his head, and it was done. The king then opened the book, and found that its leaves were stuck together. So he put his finger to his mouth, and moistened it with his spittle, and opened the first leaf, and the second, and the third. But the leaves were not opened without difficulty. He opened 6 leaves, and looked at them, but found upon them no writing. So he said, "O sage, there is nothing written in it." The head of the sage answered, "Turn over more leaves." The king did so, and in a little while the poison penetrated into his system, for the book was poisoned, and the king fell back and cried out, "The poison hath penetrated into me." And upon this, the head of the sage Duban repeated these verses. They made use of their power and used it tyrannically, and soon it became as though it never had existed. Had they acted equitably, they had experienced equity, but they oppressed, wherefore fortune oppressed them with calamities and trials. Then did the case itself announce to them, "This is the reward of your conduct, and fortune is blameless." And when the head of the sage Duban had uttered these words, the king immediately fell down dead. Thus ends the tragic story of King Yunan and the sage Duban, both of whom were undone by the greed and jealousy of the evil vizier. In the next story, the fisherman continues his tale, so stay tuned. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe.